I'm Alistair Stevens.
I'm Elizabeth Ray.
And Tom Cruise is Nick Morton in The Mummy. Ancient Egyptians begin mummifying their dead, that is, removing the moisture from the body, leaving a dried form that will not decay, around 2600 BCE during the 4th dynasty. The practice continued until the Roman period of Egypt in the 4th century CE. That is a flat 3,000 years of deliberately embalming and preserving the honored dead. Studies of the Egyptian dead took place in ancient Greece and in Rome, but modern archaeology didn't really get started until the 19th century, kick-started by the French invasion of the Ottoman territories in Egypt and Syria by noted chill dude Napoleon Bonaparte in 1798. Through the 19th century, though, mummies are presented as romantic figures. They are great and noble rulers of a vanished civilization set adrift in time, oftentimes resurrected in a modern world for which they are ill-suited. One such example is the 3-volume novel The Mummy! A Tale of the 22nd Century by Jane Webb, a 17-year-old English writer. This is, by some estimations, including my own, the first modern science fiction novel in the world.
Wow.
It is set in 2126 in a world in which women wear trousers and surgeons employ steam-powered robots and travel by airship is commonplace, and in this world, Khufu, a king from the 4th dynasty, is brought back to life by future technology and dispenses sage wisdom and advice to those who dare befriend him. There are, through the rest of the century, countless novels and stories told about mummies. Edgar Allan Poe writes one, and Arthur Conan Doyle writes one, and Bram Stoker writes one, and of course, Louisa May Alcott writes one. You know, noted author of Little Women, Louisa May Alcott, wrote a mummy book. But it's not until the 1930s that they begin to be reimagined as monsters rather than tragic, romantic figures. It is, in fact, Boris Karloff's 1932 movie, The Mummy, the first of 5 movies listed on IMDb simply called The Mummy, by the way. It's not until that film that we fold the image of the bandage-wrapped mummy into the world of the universal classic monsters alongside Dracula and Frankenstein's monster and the Wolfman and the Invisible Man and the Creature from the Black Lagoon and more. 41 universal classic monster movies are released between 1931 and 1956. That's an average of 2 a year, though between 1942 and 1944, they release 12 of the things.
Wow.
Are you a fan of the universal classic monsters?
You know what? I'm going to say no. I'm not a fan. I've never been like a horror girly.
Sure.
But I do remember like watching, I think Wolfman was the one that I watched when I was a kid, and I thought it was really cool. And of course, like I know the iconography of these monsters, mostly because my Uncle Tim, used to have a whole bunch of comic books that were all about the monsters and like also the makeup effects for doing the monsters and stuff. And I used to see those lying around. And that's why I know about, you know, Creature from the Black Lagoon, which I think I have seen. What about you?
Yeah, one of the things that happens in the wake of the Second World War is that superhero comics fall out of popularity. This is around the time that we're kind of cresting the wave of the universal classic monsters, and that leads to the surge in monster comics, right? Which basically continues through the 1970s when the pendulum swings back and superheroes are once again just completely dominant. It's wild sometimes to think about the 1960s comic market where you have horror comics and romance comics and superhero comics and Western comics all kind of competing for space on the shelves. And now, of course, it's really, at least in the United States, just a superhero medium. It's wild.
Yeah.
I'm not a huge fan of the original monsters. I mean, the iconography is undeniable.
Totally.
And I love genuinely the way that in the latter era of the Universal Classic Monsters period, they become iconicized even within the framework of their own films, right? Because the latter surge in these films is Abbott and Costello meet. They're reframed as like antagonists to this bumbling comic duo, which is such an interesting thing to have. Like, what if the next period of superhero movies turns into these iconic characters being comic foils for, I don't know, name a couple of popular comedians, right? Name a couple of popular comedians who have not themselves, in fact, already appeared in Marvel movies.
Right.
We just watched, I guess, half of Ghostbusters Frozen Empire.
Yes.
It is weird to see Kumail Nanjiani pop up in that film and remember his turn in The Eternals, a movie that has completely disappeared from popular consciousness.
Yeah, I never saw that one.
No, nor did anyone else. As far as its cultural footprint is concerned, nor did anyone else. So no, I'm not a huge classic monsters fan, but as I say, the iconography is undeniable. Like
Yeah.
everyone knows the creature from the Black Lagoon. Everyone knows the Wolfman. Everyone knows the Invisible Man. And of those, and of course, I'm kind of setting aside Frankenstein's monster here a little bit, mostly because I don't want to deal with whether or not it's Frankenstein's monster or just Frankenstein. Universal's pretty clear on this, by the way. The second movie, The Bride of Frankenstein, is not talking about the doctor. It's definitely talking about the monster.
Oh, really?
Yes, son of Frankenstein. Abbott and Costello meet Frankenstein.
Oh,
They're
man.
not meeting anyone who has created a homunculus. They are meeting the monster itself. But The Mummy is maybe the most interesting and compelling, but also underused, right? I'm so drawn to this 19th century vision of time-stranded romantic figures from the deep past. There's something so rich there that I feel has almost completely fallen out of modern mummy mythology.
Yeah.
And God knows it's fallen out of this movie.
Yes.
So from 1932, from Boris Karloff to 1989, the mummies are just monsters, plain and simple. And we have Anne Rice to thank, as we have Anne Rice to thank for so many things, for the return of horny mummies in her book, The Mummy or Ramses the Damned. This creates a space for mummies to be sexy monsters again, and I'll tell you, that leads directly to Arnold Vosloo in the best mummy movie, Stephen Sommers' 1999 blockbuster starring Brendan Fraser and Rachel Weisz and John Hannah. It is
So perfect.
That's the fourth of the 5 The Mummy movies that I mentioned. The first in 1932, the second in 1959 starring Peter Cushing and Christopher Lee, which I have seen and is tremendous. The third is an Arabic language film produced in Egypt and released in 1969. And then the Stephen Sommers film. So there wasn't a film called The Mummy for 30 years.
Wow.
Which I find surprising. I don't think we're going to go another 30 years before someone tries to reboot this franchise. But let's talk for a little bit about Stephen Sommers' The Mummy from 1999. I mean, I can't do a whole history of the film. I mean, I can and I will, but I will do it on the Patreon episode after it is selected from the poll that we will inevitably put up.
Certainly
Our
going to be the
future
pick,
is
right?
foreseen. We have a prophecy as strong as any prologue prophecy that we've seen in a mummy movie to date. But that movie is a huge success. It makes $400 million off of a budget of $80 million, which puts it in the same kind of territory as The Matrix, which comes out 2 months before The Mummy. 2 months.
Oh my God, that seems insane. Yeah.
Well, I think genuinely that this is part of The Mummy's huge success, is that it feels like it comes from a different era.
It does. It feels very Indiana Jonesy.
Exactly right.
Yeah.
I think it feels like it comes from the 1980s, pastiching the films of the 1950s. It feels absolutely like it has that kind of temporal dimensionality to it. And of course, it has, I mean, just an absolutely crackerjack cast.
Yeah, knockout
Has there
cast.
ever been a better lead in a movie like that than Brendan Fraser?
It's so good. It's such a perfect movie.
It really, really is. I'm looking forward to talking about it over on the Patreon. That's patreon.com/next word, he said, with inevitability. It also kickstarts this brand new series, right? We get The Mummy Returns in 2001. We get the Saturday morning cartoon, which airs from 2001 to 2003, which I have never seen, I must admit. We get the spin-off prequel, The Scorpion King, in 2002, which bizarrely spawns 4 sequels of its own. Many of which star The Rock, all of which star wrestlers and are produced by WWE, which is
awful.
A strange thing that happens. The Scorpion King is an extremely bad film.
I'm sure.
In fact, I think the Scorpion King as a character is an extremely bad character. I don't have fond memories of the second Mummy movie. Do you?
No. The second one is when Brendan Fraser outruns the sun. Yes. I remember that distinctly. And that's about it. There's
Sadly,
a kid.
also has a son. Yes.
Yeah. Because he's like carrying his son when he runs, right? Maybe. I don't know. There's a lot happening. No, I do not have fond memories of that. I think it's probably bad.
Hold up. Yeah. I mean, it still has some magic in it. Rachel Weisz is still being incredible.
Yeah.
Sadly, she does not return for the third installment, The Mummy Tomb of the Dragon Emperor, in 2008. Where she is replaced by Maria Bello. Though weirdly, Roger Ebert always said that that was his favorite of the franchise. He always said that Tomb of the Dragon Emperor was the best. I honestly don't think I've ever seen it.
I've never seen it. I'm not even sure I know who Maria Bello is. So.
You would recognize her if you saw her, for sure. Yeah. But
I'm sure that's true. Yeah.
But replacing Rachel Weisz and not like adding a different love interest, just recasting Evie is such an insane choice.
That's no, really you can't do that.
But you know, Jet Li's in that movie, so it can't be all
I was going to
bad.
say, Dragon Emperor, we must be,
we're
going
in
to China or something?
We absolutely are.
Weird.
We've done everything. We did 2 movies, and obviously that's everything you can do. And the thing about Egyptian culture is just like paper thin, like not a lot there.
Papyrus thin, if you will.
Papyrus thin. I'm almost tempted to let you off the trailer game for that joke, but I'm not going to. A fourth mainline Mummy film was in development at the time, but Universal cancels plans in 2012, announcing their intention to reboot the series with a new lead, presumably because Brendan Fraser was physically incapable of continuing in that role. His body is in a bad way by the time that he shoots even the third film. Screenwriter John Spates is attached, along with writers Alex Kurtzman and Roberto Orsi, the Star Trek guys who also wrote Mission Impossible 3 for J.J. Abrams. Also attached was director Len Wiseman, known for his work on the Underworld movies, which makes a ton of sense.
Yeah. I still haven't seen those either, but
Noted
that just makes sense in my brain.
Beckinsale,
Yeah.
Len Wiseman. I think that's a really good... It's not. But in 2012, I can absolutely see how that would look like a good comp for a new Mummy franchise. Wiseman drops out, though, in 2013 to focus on the TV adaptation of Sleepy Hollow and is replaced by Andy Muschietti, who was known at that point for directing the supernatural horror movie Mama, though he would drop out not long after. He would go on to direct both parts of the Stephen King adaptation It, and last year's absolutely reprehensible The Flash for DC.
Sorry.
So left without a director, this is a bad time for longtime partners Kurtzman and Orsi to have their big famous falling out. Presumably, we can infer, because Orsi got tapped to go and direct the third Abrams-era Star Trek movie, Star Trek Beyond. So this seems to be the point in the middle of 2014 at which Universal decides to reboot the whole Universal Classic Monsters line with a new dark universe. And because we are already here in the Marvel era, the cart, you see, it goes in front of the horse, like a long way in front of the horse. They had sketched out more than 20 movies over more than a decade before the first Dark Universe film hits theaters. And even that notion of the first Dark Universe film is a little bit soft because at some points in its development, Dracula Untold was supposed to be the first one.
Anything makes more sense than The Mummy being the first one. Literally anything.
Things. Well, I will explain it. The Mummy makes a lot of sense once you see this catastrophe start to tumble into place. As we move through the rest of the development story, we'll get to all of that on the other side of the aforementioned trailer game. Elizabeth, are you ready?
Sure.
Do you have so much to say about this film?
So much.
Let's go.
With so many iconic monsters in their repertoire, Universal Studios would like to remind you of a forgotten monster, an untapped resource, virgin soil. It's gonna be first when you search for it on Google. From now on, everyone will think about Tom Cruise, the god of death. This June, show me the Mummy.
How dare you? It is the most dispiriting thing about preparing my notes for this week's podcast is that every time I would Google the Mummy, it would say, "Oh, you mean the 1999 Brendan Fraser one?"
And of course you should.
No, I don't. At every turn, you're going to remind me of a better film?
So much better. The thing is, it's so much better. I just don't understand how you can start here. It just seems...
I will tell you, the backstory of some of these films has been inscrutable. Sometimes people just make decisions and you can't really track the logic. I think that this film is really self-explanatory when you look at its production process. And that begins, of course, with Roberto Orsi going off to Star Trek Productions, severing this long-term partnership with Alex Kurtzman, and Kurtzman being the last man left in the room, which is why he inherits the director's chair, despite having only ever directed one film before this, which was a 2012 drama named People Like Us, with Chris Pine, Elizabeth Banks, and Olivia Wilde. It cost $16 million. That's a tenth of the budget of this film, and it made back $12 million.
Eek.
So he hasn't exactly established his bona fides as a director, and to be fair, he will not direct again after this. He's going to go off to run all of Star Trek for CBS instead. So the studio pairs him with Chris Morgan, the guy who came in on Fast and Furious 3, that's Tokyo Drift, and completely rebuilds what that franchise is and what it can do. An absolute cast iron release date of June 2016 was decided. Then they do another round of script revisions, and they transform the antagonist from a man into a woman. The brilliant Jenny Lumet is the one who comes up with the idea of transforming another Arnold Vosloo-style mummy character into the woman that we get in this film. We then shatter that cast iron release date and put another equally as firm release date of March 2017 in place. And of course, the movie finally comes out in June of 2017. So you can tell already that the production is kind of a disaster. Interestingly, earlier this year, Stephen Sommers, who directed the first 2 installments of the Brendan Fraser-led series, said that he was, quote, kind of insulted, end quote, that no one contacted him about the reboot at any point, not even when the production was in crisis. Quote, they never contacted me or called me. I was doing other things, and it's not like I sat crying. I just think it's common courtesy.
Yeah.
End quote. Which I read to be a sign that they could have backed up the money truck to his house. And I'm pretty confident the film would have come out better if it had had a, what do you call those? Director. Yes, a director would have been really helpful at this point. In November of 2015, 5 months before principal photography on this film, right before starting work on Jack Reacher Never Go Back, Tom Cruise signs on as the lead, which immediately inflates the budget and the scale of the movie. And even before principal photography begins, Kurtzman is reported as having trouble keeping up with what is turning into a giant, unwieldy production. Exactly what happens during production is unclear, but there are 2 sides even among the crew members who worked on the movie. Either Tom Cruise is a raging egomaniac who took over production and exercised, quote, nearly complete creative oversight, end quote, or Kurtzman immediately proved himself to be incapable of directing the film, and Cruise stepped in to play to his strengths, put his people in place, and try to save the movie. What's clear is this: after years of rewrites and 7 pairs of hands touching the script, he throws it out and orders a rewrite from Christopher McQuarrie and Dylan Koosman, who had worked with Cruise on Jack Reacher. David Koepp, who wrote Mission Impossible 1 and War of the Worlds for Cruise, also worked on that script, which was being rewritten on the fly as principal photography got underway.
Yikes.
This new script focuses entirely on Cruise, sidelining both Halsey and Amonette, who are originally more significant in the plot. It's kind of conceived as a gender-flipped version of The Mummy, with Nick Morton in the sidekick role, in the love interest role, in the Evie role, which is at least potentially interesting, though there's very little of that
not
structure.
With this casting,
not with this casting. That's exactly it. It's at this point, too, that we tie this into the dark universe and come up with the idea of Nick being possessed, that Nick will ultimately go on to be the Mummy. So he's jumping from, 3rd, maybe even 4th on the call sheet, as the script is originally conceived, to absolute number 1. This is a Tom Cruise movie. Only his name will appear above the title.
Yeah.
Strange, right?
That is strange. Yeah. It seems strange that he would have signed on to it as number 3 at this point in his career.
Well, but this is also the point where he's doing Jack Reacher. This is also the point where he is about to do American Made. He's still a little uncertain. We think of Rogue Nation as being the movie that completely solidifies Tom Cruise as a movie star again. And to an extent, in retrospect, it is. But it's unclear to him and to the world whether he can do anything but Ethan Hunt at this point. So it kind of makes sense. And again, he's a Universal guy. He's connected to the studio.
That's true.
This is we can only speculate how much he regrets not taking the contract for Iron Man back in the day, which was offered to him. Not quite the Robert Downey Jr. version, but a previous version. But he could have been making billions of dollars in a Marvel movie, and it looks as though he's trying to hook to a franchise that extends beyond Mission Impossible.
Right.
Let's talk a little about the rest of our cast, shall we? Because there's not a lot of good here, is the problem.
No, there's
some charm. There's some charm, and I will defend everyone because I think that they are all interesting actors, at least, or have the potential to be interesting actors. They're just maybe not the perfect fit for this film. Let's start with Annabelle Wallis. She's born in Oxford in 1984, and as much as we do not like defining female actors by their male relatives and relations, we should note that she is the grandniece of the incomparable Richard Harris.
Whoa, grandniece.
Isn't that amazing?
That's like, what does that even mean? Interesting. Okay, got it. Yeah, got it. All right.
I just saw you put together a little
Tolkienian family tree. Yes.
Annabelle Wallis is raised in Portugal. She speaks fluent English, Portuguese, Spanish, and French. Cool. She moves to London from Portugal in 2005 to pursue a career in film, gets some minor roles before making an impression as the second actor to play Jane Seymour in The Tudors, and then being cast in the very pretty but short-lived series Pan Am, when we thought that 60s retro modernism was the thing that everyone wanted from Mad Men, and it turned out to very much not be. That show looks terrific and has nothing to say.
There's just nothing,
just
no teeth
no
in it
substance.
at all. Yeah.
In 2013, she is cast in Peaky Blinders, which is rapidly becoming, I think, like my biggest pop cultural blind spot.
Yeah.
So many things tie back to that show, and I haven't seen second one of
People
it.
are
so-
always telling me to watch it at work too. It just doesn't seem like my kind of thing, so I
Yeah.
haven't done it yet. But at some
Yeah.
point, I need to put it on. I don't have to watch the whole thing. I can just watch some.
Maybe. It might be worth just sinking into when we're done with our rewatch of Friday Night Lights.
Yeah.
Two very similar shows. I will say this about Annabelle Wallis. She has absolutely unimpeachable personal politics.
That's cool.
She absolutely conducts herself with a great deal of transparency and passion and pursues very laudable goals. Seems like an awesome person in general, though she has been in a relationship since 2022 with Sebastian Stan. So, I don't know. You never really know a person. You never really know a person. What do you think? This is going to be a hot topic. What do you think of Annabelle Wallis in this film?
I think she's very poor in this film. I'm sorry to say that. I think that she's lovely. I also kept feeling like I knew her from something else, but it's not. She's just got one of those faces where she looks a lot like a lot of people, but she isn't any of them.
I feel like that is a common thing for people who were cast in The Tudors. I feel like that
Right?
entire cast kind of looks the same. And a lot
Fair.
of people span out of that show.
Well, and I watched The Tudors, but I don't remember her.
Yeah.
I mean, and second cast Jane Seymour, like that wasn't a whole lot of there anyway.
Sure,
but
sure.
yeah.
I will defend her. She has moments in this film, I think, when she is genuinely lovely. When she is, I mean, obviously she's incredibly beautiful.
She's beautiful,
She's
for
just
sure.
staggering to look at.
Yes.
There are moments, I think, when she really exceeds the material, but they are very few and far between.
Yeah.
They're
And she can't land the comedy. That's the real problem.
She can't land the comedy.
Not-
Weirdly,
almost
despite being
nobody
English,
can.
can't land the accent, which I find
That is interesting.
her
Yeah.
accent is so weird in this film. And it's
Hmm.
not even as though she's trying to do a transatlantic kind of slightly inscrutable I'm a traveler of the world.
Yeah.
It's just not there. It's not constant. It's tough.
Yeah.
And unfortunately has no detectable chemistry with Tom Cruise.
No chemistry with Tom Cruise, and I just don't think the character is very interesting. They don't.
That's by
There's just no
far.
depth there.
Yeah, I think that's by far the biggest problem. The biggest problem in this film is, well, I was going to say the script, but it's not even the script. It's the idea.
The whole
It is
conception
the
is poor.
conceptual
Yeah,
level.
yeah. It's
is
just-
flawed and
yeah.
busted from the beginning.
From the
And
beginning. Yes.
The introduction of Tom Cruise to this production, I think, only compounds that. I think
Yeah.
the idea of an interesting gender-flipped version of the 99 Mummy, like a contemporary gender-flipped version of the 99 Mummy, there's something there. Like, here's the thing. Don't start your dark universe with the Mummy.
Don't. Yeah.
that's
That's
a
number
bad
one.
first
Don't do
step
that.
anyway.
Yeah.
And just every decision made past that point just illuminates the flaws in that original
Yeah.
idea. And the script, for all that the script has moments, and I really do think the script has moments, it doesn't hang together.
It
Hardly
doesn't.
at all.
No, I agree. And I'm not usually one to say this. I'm not an ageist person at all. But this character, Tom Cruise is too old for this character. He's too old for this guy.
Tom Cruise it's so weird. Oh, you mean Tom Cruise is too old for Nick Morton?
For Nick Morton.
I
Yeah, for
thought
this
you meant
guy.
Tom Cruise is too old for Annabelle Wallis.
Oh, potentially also that. What's the age gap?
It's a 20-year age
Yeah,
gap.
that's
It's a
20
It's a
years?
22
no,
year age gap.
no.
And having
That's
just
all bad.
watched Jack
very,
Reacher,
very bad.
where we acknowledge a
22
22
years. Absolutely. not.
although this is a film that is wildly insecure about Tom Cruise's age, as we'll, get to as we move through
Sure,
it.
sure.
Let's talk a little about Sofia Boutella. She's born in 82 in Algiers to an architect mother and a jazz musician father.
Cool.
She begins to study classical music at the age of 5. She leaves Algeria for France at the age of 10. She competes with the French national rhythmic gymnast team at the age of 18.
Holy shit.
And then winds up graduating just casually from the Berklee College of Music in Boston. Her first major movie role is Matthew Vaughn's Kingsman: The Secret Service in 2015. She then plays the hot alien Jayla in the aforementioned Star Trek Beyond. And I wouldn't normally describe a character as just the hot alien, but that really is all that she is in that film. And then the same year as The Mummy, she plays a French secret agent in Atomic Blonde. Do you remember her in Atomic
That's
Blonde?
what I was. Yes, I do. I was
Yes.
trying to figure out why I knew her. I was like, I know these bad bangs, and I have
That
seen.
film
Yes,
Is a mess.
it's
That's
a mess.
kind of brilliant.
Yeah, it's a hot mess. Yeah, it's cool.
It is
despite
extremely cool.
being totally strange. I saw that one in theaters actually.
If
yeah.
we weren't going to put The Mummy on the poll for the Patreon, I would absolutely put Atomic Blonde
Yeah,
on that poll.
Definitely,
because
that would
I
be interesting to talk about. for
cherish the
sure.
opportunity to talk about
Yeah,
that.
absolutely.
She then goes on to appear in Zack Snyder's Star Wars with different proper nouns, Rebel Moon,
Yeah.
which, hey, that's a big paycheck. I'm certain
That's
of
great.
that.
Sure.
What do you think of Sophia Botella? I mean, a lot of physicality, a lot of presence on screen.
I don't know. That's a good question. I really always do think of her as Bad Bangs Girl, which is not cool. That's probably not her fault, but it's just she's got such a look that she seems more like a supermodel than she does an actor a lot of times.
Yeah.
I loved her physicality in this. It's true.
And having seen Star Trek Beyond, her physicality in that film is also really interesting.
That makes sense if she was a dancer.
Yeah, she's really taking a dancer's approach to movement.
Absolutely.
Here,
That's very
and it
cool.
Feels very atypical, feels very disjointed. There are moments in this film where I think without much digital augmentation, she is just physically very weird.
Yeah, super unsettling.
Uncomfortable.
Oh,
yes,
yeah. And that is all very cool. Yeah. So as a model / modern dance person, I'm very impressed. As an actor, I'm yet to be wowed.
Yeah, and I mean, she hasn't really had much opportunity.
Exactly, and that's fine. Yeah,
I don't know that I've ever seen her, deliver a really nuanced and dialogue-heavy performance.
Yeah.
That might not be her strength. Mm-hmm. I do find her compelling, and I find the way that she's presented, the way that she's rendered visually in this film, pretty consistently compelling.
In general, this film looks great.
This film.
Like, I have almost nothing bad to say about the way the film looks and the way that, like, those, like, moving parts come together.
Yes. I think that if I have a criticism of the film's look, it is in its excess. This is a film that will not include, 12 spiders when it can include 1,200 spiders, or 50 rats when it can include 500 rats.
That is true.
Or
that's
one
fair.
underwater zombie chasing Nick Morton when we could have, for no good reason, 6 underwater zombies chasing Nick Morton. Like, everything is just so dialed up.
It is dialed way up. That is true.
But apart from that, I think it's rendered really beautifully. And I'm not
I could
just
have done
talking
without
about
all the gunplay. I don't
also,
like it. We talked about this before. I really am finding that in general, I don't want to watch assault rifles. I just don't want to watch that.
I'm going to put a pin in that because I think there is a political take on this film that could sink it to dead last on our list. I think that the politics of this film are beyond dubious. I think that they are actively, extremely, aggressively, insultingly bad.
Yeah, kind of colonialist, white, just old school bad.
In the
right?
21st century, right? Kind of riffing off of that two-fisted pulp colonialism that we can, which is bad itself, but at least it happened a century ago.
Yes.
And we can kind of fudge it, right? Should Indiana Jones be going into these countries and retrieving their relics?
Right.
No, right? And Lara Croft shouldn't be either. And Rick O'Connell shouldn't be doing it either.
Right.
But we kind of forgive it because it has this world-spanning,
antiquity and
mid-century, kind of pulp reflection on the end of the 19th century kind of gentleman adventurer archetype, and we can kind of forgive that. But what it doesn't do is root itself in a contemporary and terribly tragic conflict in modern-day Iraq.
I know.
We don't literally murder dozens of people in the opening movements of the 1999 The Mummy and hand wave it away because they are, quote, insurgents.
Yeah.
Also, our gentleman adventurer archetype is not an enlisted U.S. soldier.
That's very true.
He is not an arm of the state. Straight up, I cannot really talk about this film politically because the anger that I feel
I can see
will leave the rest of this podcast just no fun for anyone at all. So I'm willing to hand wave that away, but I do want to revisit that when we are putting this on the list right at the end of today's episode.
Astute.
For now, let's lighten the mood. Let's turn our attention to Jake Johnson, shall we?
Here's the thing about Jake Johnson. He is always doing the same thing, and I like that thing.
It's
I am
really
always happy to see him. I'm like, oh, here he is. He's not going to surprise me with this performance, but I'm going to be glad that he's here.
He is, though, another example of this film's insecurity about Tom Cruise's age, because he and Tom Cruise are clearly supposed to be buddies, right? Chris and Nick. Oh, the dynamic duo themselves. He's born in 1978. He is a full 15 years younger than Tom Cruise. He's born in Evanston, Illinois. He begins studies at the University.
He is a Midwestern boy, isn't he? He's got that all over him.
To his boots, he is a Midwestern boy. Absolutely. He begins studying at the University of Iowa, but writes a play which earns him a place at Tisch in New York.
Damn.
During his time there, he wins a couple more playwriting and screenwriting prizes. He starts a comedy troupe. Then he moves out to LA. He has a drunk conversation with Derek Walters in 2007 in which he tries to recount the history of Otis Redding's death, which inspires Drunk History, the show.
Oh my God.
All of Drunk History is Jake Johnson's fault, and for that we must commend him.
I do. This is not helping my Jake Johnson crush, I have to say.
I am also developing quite the Jake Johnson crush, I'm going to tell you. He appears in a handful of movies in small roles. It's in 2011, though, when he is cast distractingly for this film as Nick Miller in New Girl.
Super weird for him to keep on calling somebody else Nick in this movie.
Really? And you haven't even watched that much.
Not much, yeah, but enough.
Yeah. Jake Johnson is fantastic in Safety Not Guaranteed with Aubrey Plaza. He's fantastic in Drinking Buddies with Olivia Wilde and Anna Kendrick and Ron Livingston. That is a slept-on jam. Go watch Drinking Buddies. It's extremely good with I genuinely think 4 really great performances anchoring it, though he is the standout. And it's at this point where he's starting to break in movies that he takes a step back because, as he said publicly, he doesn't enjoy it. He doesn't enjoy the process of shooting these big films. He's in a Jurassic World, for example, and he just doesn't like having to be on set for weeks at a time, having to repeat the same line over and over and over. He wants to do something that is more quick, a faster turnaround, more spontaneous.
I totally get
than that. And that's when Tom Cruise comes to him and says, you are my guy, you are my buddy in the new film, you will come to set with me, you will live in the same hotel as me, my personal chef will cook for us, my personal trainer will train you too.
Wow.
And Jake Johnson says, as I think most of us would say, yes, because how do you turn that down? Even if it's a nightmare, which it may have been.
And stayed out of Scientology, so good for him.
Right? Mm-hmm. Fantastic work there. Even if it's a nightmare, you are going to have a story for the rest of your life after being in a big budget movie with Tom Cruise. The year after The Mummy, Jake Johnson will play Peter Parker in Into the Spider-Verse, which would maybe be my favorite version of Peter Parker, if not for the version that Chris Pine gives in that self-same movie.
It's so good.
Which is, for me, the definitive Peter Parker.
God, Chris Pine, too.
Jake Johnson appears in a fantastic standalone episode of Mythic Quest on Apple TV Plus, or whatever that service is called. He does this tragic little love story with Christina Milioti. Just this, it's genuinely just like a little one-act, two-hander. Mythic Quest is interestingly adventurous and experimental in its structural formalism. It's a really, really interesting show that is cloaked in a really, really dumb show. But I find its interestingness to be more than enough to get me through the run of that show. And of course, before we conclude on Jake Johnson, he plays Doug Renetti in 2 excellent seasons of the show Minx, a fictional history of a woman's pornographic magazine in the 1970s.
That show was written for us.
That show is so interesting. Not always good, but when it is bad, it is absolutely compelling. It really had a troubled creation. It was cancelled after the first season and then taken back for the second season and now has been cancelled again. But
well, it did lose its footing in the second part.
It lost its footing in the first season too, though, is the thing. It's
it starts out so strong
idea.
and just kind of like dissipates. I don't know what happens.
So in short, you'd say you're here for whatever Jake Johnson is selling.
Yes.
Excellent.
Absolutely.
The last actor that we absolutely have to talk about is, of course, Russell Crowe, but we've already talked about Russell Crowe over on our bonus episode for Master and Commander, The Far Side of the World.
God,
so stop by patreon.com/nextword to hear all the details. Suffice it to say, for now, obviously, he's the major tie to the extended Dark Universe as Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, and it must be noted that Tom Cruise is a younger man than he. Russell Crowe, for those of you at home, is 2 years younger than Tom Cruise.
To be fair, he does look like the older guy in this movie.
Because he kind of makes all of his acting decisions and has done for the last 15 years based on, I think this guy might be a little heavy, little burly. This guy probably drinks beer, right? This guy probably drinks a lot of beer. That seems to be the primary motivating factor in all of Russell Crowe's work now for a while. And you know what? That's fine. I'm going to come out and say it. I think he's pretty good in this film.
I think he's fun. Yeah, he's pretty good. Giving his all.
And when we get the switch to Hyde, I haven't seen Crowe have that much fun on the film.
I was going to say, if anything,
since Master and Commander, maybe. And Master and Commander is not even fun for him.
Oh, so different. Hard to say. But I mean, he's chewing the scenery a little bit. But as Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, what else are you going to do? Like but see, right? See, I think the mistake you're making there is assuming that anything in this film is conceptually solid. You're absolutely right. You get cast as Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Maybe it is assumed that you will chew the scenery, but in this film,
Who can say? And it's not like we haven't had bad versions of that character before. If you remember the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen movie, the Jason Fleming performance in that film.
I don't remember that. I do remember the movie because I remember really wanting to watch the movie because everything about it on paper sounded like it was just for me and my nerd heart, who also thought boys were super cute at that time.
Shane West.
Shane West. I was so excited to see Shane West. Yeah.
Shane West is Tom Sawyer of all people. Like,
it's just so fucking weird.
Tom Sawyer of the FBI is like, that is what the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen is for.
Yeah.
Like, doing that precisely is so great. Connery's, he's a little checked out in some parts of that film, but I think it's genuinely a solid. Peter Wilson as Mina Harker. Not many people have ever been hotter on film than her in that film. Very, very compelling. Oh, and you've got Stuart Townsend, who plays Dorian Gray, who's giving a very like Oscar Wilde performance at the heart of the film. See, that's another film we could definitely have discussed over on the Patreon, except we're going to be talking about The Mummy, and I'm glad of that. The movie shoots between April and August of 2016, mostly in London, but also for 2 weeks right at the end of the shoot in Namibia, which is where we get all of those incredible exterior shots for the beginning of the film. The cinematographer, who we should definitely call out, is Ben Saracen, who had previously shot Transformers Revenge of the Fallen and Pain and Gain for Michael Bay and World War Z for Mark Foster, which is a similarly incomprehensible film that also looks amazing.
It does look really good.
Though it does look amazing in a different way. I think that this is kind of a little atypical for him, but he's clearly very comfortable with working around a lot of visual effects. Yeah. And as you say, this film looks great. The score is composed by Brian Tyler, most famous for his work at the time for his contributions to the Fast and the Furious franchise, for the Expendables movies, and his work for Marvel, including Iron Man 3 and Thor: The Dark World. He recently scored the Super Mario Brothers movie, which low-key has an extremely good score. It manages to take all of those iconic Mario hits, right? Which are all like 4 bars. They're all so short, but it weaves them into this orchestral score that I think is really imaginative and resourceful. He's also working on the forthcoming and completely unnecessary Transformers 1 for Josh Cooley. Quick note before we get to the release of this movie. On December 20th, 2016, 6 months before the movie comes out, the IMAX trailer was famously released without proper audio mixing, without most of the audio tracks, meaning that the only audio was some diegetic sound and Tom Cruise groaning and screaming as we move through chunks of the sequence on the plane. It was a genuinely embarrassing thing to happen. They tried to take it down immediately, but it is, of course, the internet, so they couldn't. And as someone who releases audio, semi-professionally, I do totally get it. Sometimes you just don't click that button. You're exporting the file, you check the old version and not the new version, then you upload it to the derision and mockery of millions of people. It is just the curse of the mummy, though. It is haunted from the beginning. They should never have cracked open that ancient Egyptian urn to find a copy of this script. The movie is finally released on June 9th, 2017, and it does not go well. It hits the box office charts at number 2, failing to dethrone the second week of Wonder Woman, which still manages to make double. In its second week, it makes double the opening weekend of The Mummy. Third at the box office is Captain Underpants, the first epic movie, a thing I know nothing about and refuse to learn. 4 is Pirates of the Caribbean, Dead Men Tell No Tales, the 5th and so far final Pirates of the Caribbean movie, I guess. Number 5 is Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. 6 is the horror movie It Comes at Night. And number 7 is the Zac Efron Baywatch movie, if you remember that thing existing.
Yeah, a little bit.
And everything thereafter is a real mixed bag. Despite this strongly negative critical reaction, The Mummy does make $410 million worldwide off of a declared budget of $195 million. However, at the time, Deadline reported an ad spend of $150 million, which means that the movie probably at the end of the day barely broke even.
Yeah.
And that's unacceptable to risk-averse major studios at this point. Maybe don't put Alex Kurtzman in charge of $195 million.
Oof, dang.
To the extent that this film is remembered at all, it is remembered for events which took place 3 months after its release. The next movie in the Dark Universe, The Bride of Frankenstein, set to star Javier Bardem and Gal Gadot,
cool.
was cancelled.
Aww.
Like The Mummy, though, the franchise was restless in its grave and returned once more. Specifically, the cancelled version of The Invisible Man, which was supposed to be a Dark Universe movie, was retooled. It was stripped of all of its Dark Universe branding and its ties to the wider universe, and finally shot under director Lee Wannell, the guy who directed Saw and Insidious, and all of the various sequels there too. It starred Elizabeth Moss, Aldous Hodge, beloved of this parish, and Storm Reed. The movie was produced for only $7 million. So you can see by this point, Universal is way out on mega budget franchise blockbusters. It made back over $100 million despite being released on February 28th, 2020.
I was going to say, I have no memory of this. That must be why.
It was eaten alive by COVID. It would have been, by all accounts, a much bigger hit. Like, it would have been one of the biggest, low-budget horror hits of all time had its run not been forestalled by the arrival of the novel coronavirus.
Yeah.
Pretty tough time for movies.
Mm-hmm.
So, having heard that story, does the film with which you are presented make a little more sense?
A little bit, yes, but not enough.
I'm not asking you to forgive it.
Okay, yes, then.
But you can see, I think, the internal pressures, right?
Yeah.
There's a reason that everything is underwritten and undermotivated. There's a reason that we're leaning way too hard on these splashy set pieces because that's easier than actually writing a solid plot with convincing characters and all of that.
Yes.
The thing that I find most baffling is the constant desire to make Nick Morton, what would you say, like late 30s maybe, as opposed to fully 51 years old when he shoots
it's
this?
strange. And also dumb. No.
Say more on that.
Well, to me, Cruise's best moments in this movie are when he's delivering like the actual emotional material, and he lands it so hard that it makes me want the movie to be different because he's a good actor.
Yeah.
I'm stumbling towards this, forgive me. But we're supposed to believe that he's just this idiot dick-swinging guy that I don't buy from Cruise.
To be fair, he was for a full decade. This movie starts with Nick Morton as your man from Cocktail, right? He is this roguish scoundrel who sleeps with women and steals their maps and goes to recover there's
but
a
again,
version.
That's at 20-something years old. Like
that's what I'm saying.
He just doesn't look. He isn't that anymore.
No, and hasn't been for 15 years at this point, right?
Yeah,
like, what is the last movie in which he's like openly that guy? I guess we get a little bit of it in War of the Worlds, but really we're just leaning on you're a bad
that's
dad.
so different. Yeah.
Is it Jerry Maguire? Like the first act of Jerry Maguire is the last time that he's that dude, that he's that charming, roguish scoundrel of a man?
Maybe.
I can't think of anything after that. Not in an uncomplicated way. Obviously bits of Vanilla Sky, but that's not really real. And
yeah. I mean, it's just a young archetype, I think, and it just doesn't make any sense here.
You're right, because what is charming when you are even 30 years old,
35,
stops being charming when you are 52 years old. Yeah, a little bit. Particularly when you are sleeping with a woman 22 years younger than you.
To steal from her.
To steal from her, so that you can then steal from the Iraqis.
Pretty terrible. Yeah.
The other thing that I think really betrays the production story for this film is its structural insecurity, right? We have so many assertions of what is true and important, right? There's so much telling rather than showing in this film. And that begins with our opening prologues, I guess. We get our opening sequence of the terrific tunnel boring machine deep under London, recovering...
Which is kind of cool.
Yeah, unearthing this Crusader mausoleum.
Right.
Which is a pretty great sequence, but ultimately irrelevant, ultimately unnecessary, ultimately...
We won't need it. And they're just going to explain it to us again later. So
exactly right, like a couple times over. Then with Russell Crowe providing a stentorious kind of voiceover.
Out of nowhere. It feels like we're 20 minutes in and suddenly there's a voiceover. And I'm like, what are we doing? Why are we starting over? Like
fully 4 or 5 minutes. But that is
it feels like a long time.
time.
It feels like a weird time to start the voiceover.
Because he enters into the scene of the Crusader Mausoleum and then just starts telling us a completely different story.
And then we don't see him again in the movie for an hour.
For an hour.
So weird.
Like, this is it. It's just really insecure. Yeah. It's really trying to assure us that what we are seeing is like cool and important and awesome when none of it or actually that's not even fair. It's fine. This is a decent like you find a crypt of Second Crusade knights beneath the city of London. Like, okay, I'm enough of a damn brown guy.
Sure,
I'm in.
To be like, that's cool.
Yeah, you better be finding the Holy Grail in there. Yeah. But apart from that, this is good, strong, solid stuff, and it is kind of Indiana Jonesy, right? It's got some of that spirit to it, and of course, the Stephen Sommers Mummy established very firmly that you can do an extended prologue set in ancient Egypt with very little dialogue and everyone will be emotionally connected to it.
Yeah.
What do you think of the decision to make Amunet just the swing here, I guess, is to try and make her a more complex figure, right? That she is denied the power of Pharaoh by systemic misogyny
Right.
in ancient
Yes.
Egypt. Do we buy that? Are we interested in that?
First of all, I have a stupid question.
Okay.
Was Egypt patriarchal in that way? Because
We
I feel like
don't-
Cleopatra and...
But Cleopatra is literally 2,500 years later. We
Oh,
don't really know
so we
that
don't
much
know- okay.
about the Fourth Dynasty. Yeah.
All right, fair enough. Yeah, and there was another one. Who was the other queen? Nefertiti?
Yep,
Yeah, they
yeah.
were like... So, I don't know.
We're also,
It's
we should note,
fine.
we're playing fast and loose with actual Egyptian history here and
Sure.
actual Egyptian
As we always do, it
mythology
seems.
here
Yes.
too. Yeah, we're really ungrounded from actual ancient Egyptian culture in this film. It's basically a made-up fantasy place.
Right.
As far as that goes.
Yes. That's too bad. It's fine, except that it does make the whole thing feel even more like whitewashed, like more of a colonizer's version of this bedtime story that is a nightmare story. I don't know. There's something uncomfortable about it that I don't like.
Yeah, but by layering in this superficial take on 21st century gender politics, you're
Yeah.
just kind of making it worse because you're stripping away what could make a story like this feel mythic, feel grand.
And then
in
she
that
ultimately
sense.
does just, murder her family and a baby. And that's
Yes.
pretty messed up.
Well,
so it's
what's
like, is this
so-
interesting and nuanced or is it
What's
just
so interesting about this,
villainous?
it's not entirely clear because the script does not still exist. Apparently, you can't find this script online.
Mhm.
But apparently, the Jenny Lumet version, which gender flips the central cast here, apparently the deal is that she needs the ritual dagger to sacrifice herself so that she will be reborn as Set.
Oh.
Like, she doesn't need a male partner to,
Yeah.
I don't know, complete this weird this domestic fantasy life.
Right.
Yeah, which is probably stronger just because it strips away the necessity of relying on a man for this reeks of like mid 2000s strong female character
It does.
SFC, right? It's kind of
Yes,
got
yeah,
that
yeah.
stink upon it.
Definitely.
It is beautifully shot,
Yes. Surprisingly sexy, kind
a
of.
little sexy,
Maybe too
really
sexy
riding the
because
line on the
then-
PG-13. here.
Yeah.
Yes, because
Again,
there are no
who's this
nipples.
movie for?
we are
Okay.
we are artfully
Yeah.
concealing nipples,
Okay.
which is the
But
dividing line.
otherwise, basically fully nude. Yeah, strange.
Yeah. Again, I think that her ability as a dancer, her ability
Definitely.
to move, communicates. Like,
Totally.
I think there is more in her moving her body in terms of like narrative and theme. There is more in the movement of her body than in any line of dialogue in this
Yes.
entire film.
Yeah, shut up, Crow.
Shut up, Crow. Well, no, Crow can talk. Crow and Jake Johnson can go out drinking. That's actually what I want to see. That's the film that I want.
Poor Jake Johnson's character, too. He's just given so much clunky exposition to just say out loud to camera. It's terrible.
And what is it? It's is it American Werewolf in London? What is the werewolf movie that does exactly this trick of externalizing the form of the human, right? To
Yeah.
kind of communicate. I think I'm not sure.
I don't know. Again, I'm just not a horror movie
I'm
girly.
not a big werewolf guy either, I have to say. Yeah.
Sorry.
Speaking of Jake Johnson, though, in 2017, in modern-day Iraq, Nick Morton and Chris Vale are, treasure hunting around Mosul, which is kind of gross anyway.
And are they like, so they're active
They
military?
are long-range reconnaissance. They
they're-
are scouts on the ground for the American army.
Okay.
Yes.
But like as a hobby, are also on the side, hush hush,
They are
treasure hunting.
absolutely stealing relics and antiquities to sell on the black market.
On the black
a
market.
thing which really happened during the American invasion of Iraq, right?
Yeah.
Like going back
Oh.
to the first Gulf War in the
Mhm.
90s. That really, I mean, every other conflict since, I'm sure. And
Yeah.
God knows every other conflict before. I mentioned Napoleon's
Right.
journeys to Egypt, which just filled French museums for like generations to come. So it is a part of that kind of conquest of war. But here in the 21st century, from our enlightened perspective, we can say, that sucks, don't do it. What are you doing?
Yeah.
And we're supposed to be rooting for this guy who does not have a grander goal, right? That's
Right.
the trick that gets you past this with Indiana
belongs
Jones.
in a
With Laura,
museum.
it belongs in a
Yeah.
museum, which A, no it doesn't. And B, if it does, probably a museum in its native land would be better than an American museum, Dr. Jones.
Yeah.
But that is like the hook. You can communicate a kind of scientific interest, like a purity of principle.
Humanity,
here.
something,
Yes,
something.
exactly.
Yes.
It elevates humanity. This is explicitly from the jump to sell this shit on the black market.
Yeah. Gross.
Awful. And also, he's a real dick to his buddy Chris.
Yeah. Yes.
I really, like, not to be so petty about this film, but that really bothers me through the
Yeah.
first act of this. Why is Jake Johnson hanging out with Tom Cruise? I mean, Jake Johnson is hanging out with Tom Cruise for the millions of dollars of a paycheck that he received. Why is Chris Vail hanging out with Nick Morton?
Yeah, that's a good question.
Except to make him look younger. And then, as if things weren't bad enough, they call down an airstrike in order to save their own lives, murdering, as I say, at least bare minimum dozens of people, basically wiping this small town off the map.
Yeah, it's really actually upsetting.
It is.
It's not entertaining.
Profound. And for the glamour shot of the drone rising away from the devastation, like, you are misreading your audience horribly. You would be misreading your audience in 2003. You are sure as hell misreading your audience more than a decade later.
Yeah.
We do
get a very cool stunt when the building falls down and they both like run down the roof of the building.
Yeah.
That's a good looking stunt.
It is a good looking stunt. A lot of the physical stunts, I think, when the CGI doesn't get in the way, a lot of the physical stunt work is really impressive.
And you know what? I will even say it was really good CGI in this. I was very rarely thrown out by the CGI.
Almost all of it. Extremely good. Yeah. I mean, that's what you get for almost $200 million. But sure.
Animals, the camel spiders and the rats threw me out as CGI, but basically everything else was pretty good.
The rats, I think, were particularly bad.
The rats were bad,
but you're right. Most of it extremely good, and most of it like really artfully designed.
Yes.
Too. A lot of the speed ramping with the movement of the mummy, I thought was really good.
What it ended up feeling like was a really great, expensive cutscene from a video game most of the time. Yes. You know what I mean?
Yeah, from like a Tomb Raider game, for example, or an Uncharted game, for example.
Yeah, definitely.
100%. This is the point at which the movie really swings upward for me personally, because this is the appearance of Courtney B. Vance, the brilliant Courtney B. Vance as Colonel Greenway, who shows up just to yell at Tom Cruise for a bit.
Sure.
And then we introduce Jennifer Halsey, our love interest, our unnecessary tie to the wider world of the dark universe. Does she work for you here? I mean, this is, again, I'm going to try and defend it by saying, again, it's mid-2000s strong female character, right? She just shows up. She's got this recurring joke about how the sex with Tom Cruise was dissatisfying, which we're going to circle back to because he wants to assure the audience, and I don't mean the character, I mean the actor Tom Cruise wants to definitely assure the audience that the sex was very satisfying. Thank you. I hate this film. I'm growing to hate this film more and more as we talk about it.
It's not good. Yeah.
Does anything here, does this work for you?
No, nothing here works for me.
At least we get the visual spectacle of the ruin of the prison that has been constructed here. I even love the incidental detail of we're 1,000 miles away from Egypt. Like, they shouldn't be here.
No,
that's
when
really strong.
They like rappel down into the cave, it looks sick. It looks so awesome. It's really cool. Everything else is bad.
The use of Mercury throughout this movie, conceptually, I really like it. But the problem with Mercury is that it looks a lot like a bad CGI render of water from like 2001.
Yeah, definitely.
So it's, I guess, a
Adds
really
to the
good
video
digital effect
of it.
Yeah, that just kind of makes me. It reminds me of really bad visual effects from like the original, the Angelina Jolie Tomb Raider movie. Inside the tomb, Morton starts getting visions of Amunet, and Chris Vail gets bitten by a camel spider, which is probably going to be fine, right? Nothing bad is going to happen.
But it's not a camel spider; it's a cursed camel spider.
It's a cursed camel spider. Yeah, well, yes, is it, or is it a regular camel spider? The exact means by
cursed.
which, but the mummy controls animals or influences animals. We see again the rats in London, the frequent use of crows.
Which was cool. The birds are cool. The birds look neat.
And again, really unsettling. There are some, particularly when they come out of the tomb, and there are just crows everywhere. Yeah. That is weird.
It is weird.
I kind of like
cool.
it.
Yeah.
It is properly... that's it. It feels in those moments like a psychological horror movie, right? Like a low-budget, slow burn, Curse of the Mummy kind of like, are you losing your mind? Is anything weird really happening?
Yeah.
That sits a little uncomfortably alongside the action-adventure dynamic of the rest of the film. But it works pretty well there. We get the escape onto the military transport plane. And a longer sequence, again, this is where we revisit how satisfying the sex was or was not between Nick and Jenny.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, Jake Johnson giving it in the back of the shot a lot of times, just like really looking uncomfortable and terrible. Yeah. You do wonder that no one's checking on him.
No one is paying the least bit of attention. Everyone is the most selfish, narcissistic person. Yeah. Everyone. Yeah, it's terrible.
And it is genuinely shocking when he kills Courtney B. Vance, when he kills Greenway. Yeah. Like, that is a stark moment in this film. Did that really hit you?
I mean, yeah, the movie is surprisingly violent in a way that is like, I keep saying unsettling, but it is just unsettling, I guess.
I think unsettling is the thing that the best version of this film would happily be going for, honestly.
Mm.
I think unsettling is the thing that you want from, a mummy, particularly I don't know, supernaturally and non-specifically
Sure.
empowered mummy like this, like, where it's all just weird animals and weird happenstance and, crashing on the old abbey and, the mists rising up. It's interesting.
I think the makeup on Johnson is good, but I think the fact that his character changes so little when he becomes undead maybe is not the best.
I mean, at first he changes completely.
Right,
and
because
then
then
he
he's
just kind
murdering
of
people.
Resets.
Exactly.
Which I'm happy for because, like, I think the scene when they're in the pub in London, when they're in the bathroom of the pub where we're playing the mirror game,
right.
I think that is a genuinely great scene. I think that really, really works for me.
Okay.
I should reiterate, perhaps at this point, I think this movie has real high points. I think it does really smart stuff. It just does them very inconsistently. And what's surrounding those moments is just shockingly bad.
Yeah.
From there, we're into the plane crash.
Which is a very cool stunt. The 0G stuff where they're floating around and slamming into the walls. It looks really cool.
Which they actually shot flying the vomit comet, those parabolic arcs to actually, counteract the effects of gravity within. Again, this film spared no expense. And I suppose there's something to be said, right? Considering the movies that we've been looking at lately, there is something to be said for a movie that cost $200 million and looks like it cost $200 million.
Yeah,
like it's all there on the screen.
Mm-hmm.
I do think this sequence is probably the most consistent and sustained run of good stuff in the entire film. Like it is dramatic. It is disconcerting. It feels both familiar because, we've seen Tom Cruise on planes a lot.
Yes.
Quite recently, in fact.
Uh-huh.
But it still feels novel. It still feels interesting. And it feels like the threat is just so intangible.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
That the world itself is like rising up against you. And that feels very powerful to me. The decision to give the parachute to Jenny and then, Nick Morton's death.
Right.
I think also very punchy.
Yeah, agree.
I don't, politics aside, I think that the opening movement of this film is pretty solid.
I think so too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
From there, we cut to, I guess it's the following day, where
right.
naked Tom Cruise wakes up in a body bag in a morgue with a toe tag. Which, again, like compelling visual imagery. And it looks good.
Mm-hmm.
Cruise still looks weird.
Yes, this is the closest to naked Tom Cruise we've ever gotten, right?
Yes, I mean...
Because it's just like him just holding his junk for a second. Right?
Yeah, when he's not being covered like it's Austin Powers by like things in the foreground of the shot, which is like, don't do that anymore. That was a parody 20 years ago, you guys.
Yeah.
Yes, we've seen his butt many times.
Yes, that's right. Jerry
We're
Maguire.
Going to see his butt again next week in American Made, for example. Jerry Maguire, all the way back in Taps, for sure. We get a glimpse of him in the shower.
Sure, everybody's in the
very
shower.
Early performance.
Yeah.
All the right moves. We see his butt.
We talked about this because he said you should have to see my ass if you're going to see her.
That's right. When he's talking about Leah Thompson.
Like,
yes, yes,
she goes full topless, but he was just like.
Tom Cruise standing up for his female co-stars back in the day. Yeah.
You're right.
That's a happy memory in the middle of this episode. Thanks, babe. And I guess far and away, do we actually...
Far and away, she's like spying at him getting dressed.
You know what? He's
it doesn't
concealed.
Feel like it could have been a stunt double.
He's
because
concealed by a mixing bowl in Far and Away.
You're right.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I guess he's been naked more than you might think.
You're right.
But yeah, this is very naked, and certainly we haven't seen him naked in since 1996, almost 20 years by the time this movie comes out. And he's Tom Cruise. Like he has an objectively like good musculature, I suppose, but he just always looks a little bit weird naked, and he has for his entire career.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's just he's muscled for a little
stocky.
guy.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's true. Oh my God, and we're forgetting, of course, Stacey Jacks, where at least his shirtlessness is sexualized in a way that it hasn't been in any other film. We forgot about Stacey Jacks, so this project's been a complete success. I think, for me personally, that this scene is where the wheels start to come off this film because I think this is bad. And playing it for comedy doesn't work for me. And
well, and also I have a lot of trouble tracking just like the actual plot and character arc of Nick Morton as he returns from the dead and is like kind of attached to what's her name? Amanette.
Yes.
and
Well, that
set
happens. That happens in the
and-
tomb. She
right.
identifies him from safely within her sarcophagus, which means that the sarcophagus is maybe not as good as it should be. She connects with him. That's why he has that vision. That's why he
Right.
shoots that the restraining cable and
Yes,
elevates
and
it
elevates
with this,
everything up.
what is a real Tomb Raider Rube Goldberg machine
Yeah.
inside of the tomb.
Cool.
But
Like
that's
it.
the moment where the connection is forged. And you know what? There's a version of this. I mean, we kind of do this honestly in The Mummy Returns with Evie, where we just remember that she is the reincarnation. Suddenly we remember that she is the reincarnation of an ancient Egyptian princess, right?
Which is very cool.
It's just this kind of thing that it's a thing that horror stories can do, particularly like deep past, even cosmological horror stories can do, is like you have just been selected and you are shit out of luck. Like it's a bad day to be Nick Morton. And I kind of like that. I particularly like gender flipping it. There's something of substance there that absolutely, yeah, you're right, doesn't manifest in the film, because what happens now is that Jenny just takes him to a pub. And we're reintroduced to Chris. I guess we get reintroduced to Chris right there in the morgue.
Right.
It happens almost
yes,
immediately.
he's right there. Yeah.
And he's once again chatty and jovial.
But he's just chatty comic relief again, and I don't know.
And
It just doesn't hold
exposition.
together.
And there's a lot
of exposition. I'm so sorry. Yes.
And then we get another inconsistency here as we move forward, because in the pub, Jenny is the one that is telling him, this is so serious. We've tangled with an ancient evil. We've angered the gods. Then he goes into the bathroom, chats with Chris, has this vision of a flood of rats and the mummy accosting him on a London street.
Yeah.
Comes to his senses, explains to Jenny what he just experienced, and she says, "No, you're crazy. I think you hit your head." Which, who is this character?
Yeah.
What is this? Why is this? All the reporters' questions.
Doesn't.
We do know where this is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
But again, even contained within this, narrative anarchy that's happening here, we have these seeds of some really good ideas, right? His desire to go to the Abbey, to the crash site, and to see her body, right?
Right.
That is justified narratively as him seeking closure, right? He needs to know that she's dead and that there's nothing mysterious happening. But that is her inside his head.
Yes, and then driving right back to her was
the driving
really cool.
of the ambulance, masterfully
really
done.
smart.
Really,
you're right.
Shocking.
That was
and
smart.
that's when we're doing all of this speed ramped mummy movement, where suddenly she's fast and suddenly she's there and suddenly she's with us, and all of that. I think that sequence works really nicely.
It's cool.
Yeah,
I agree.
And even to some extent, the end of that sequence where she is accosted by the soldiers, the warriors of the Prodigium, who come and hit her with harpoon guns to restrain her. Really visceral and kinetic and physical. And again, all credited to Sofia Boutell's performance there,
right?
Because she manages to sell that, I think, so beautifully.
Does. Yeah.
And all of that is great. And then the film stops dead in its tracks for, I don't know, 2 hours of exposition.
Yeah.
That's just building out the Dark Universe. That's not doing anything for this film. It is actively counteracting this film. It is actively getting in the way of The Mummy, the motion picture, and is instead just setting up this franchise that's all the more egregious because that franchise never
even happened.
Yeah.
So yeah, absolutely.
Did you love the parade of artifacts contained within the subterranean offices of the Prodigium? The little Dracula skull and the hand of the creature from the Black Lagoon.
Oh, that was cool. The production design's off the charts. Like, everything looks great. The only thing I have to say about it is that I wish it was more steampunky and really leaned into the steampunk, because the moments where it's just like high tech, like the handprint on to get in and out of a door and stuff, is like less.
So interesting, because I felt exactly the same way until Hyde, I guess.
Sure.
Where he smashes Nick's face into that faceplate, and I think we're building out a thematic idea that this high technology makes you feel safe, but it isn't safe. It isn't secure. Because ultimately, all of the high technology fails because a spider crawls in a dude's ear.
Yes.
And there's something really crunchy, because you don't establish, at the end of the first Iron Man movie, we don't have Nick Fury introducing the Avengers Initiative with the Avengers campus. You don't provision your organization, your secret organization, with all of this tech, if that tech is actually going to be effective. So I kind of like the idea that if this had continued into the Dark Universe, we'd really be on the back foot, right? It doesn't feel totally dissimilar to the destruction of MI6 in the Bond movies, right? Either of the times that we've done that. I like that as a way of creating some thematic friction there, even though, it doesn't really hold together. But we were talking earlier about Russell Crowe being, I think, generally very good here. And I do think his scenes with Cruise are the scenes when the humor in the script, with the exception of Jake Johnson, who can just be funny by himself in an empty room, I think that the moments when Crow and Cruise are on screen together are probably the funniest. Cruise gets a line reading here where when Crow pitches him on the idea, we're going to sacrifice you with this dagger so that Set can take over your body, and then we're going to kill Set, and that will undo this great evil in the world. Cruise gets this line reading where he says, I'm not interested in that at all.
Yeah.
And it's a really like risky business line read that reminds you of who Cruise is when he's at his best. I don't know. There's something there.
Yeah, that was a funny line. He gets a couple of funny lines.
The other thing about this, I think, when you're talking about the production design, the sets are huge.
Yeah.
They are just giant.
Yes.
I kind of love that. It's so easy just to green screen all that stuff in now these days.
That's true.
There's
that
a lot of physicality
Yeah.
in this
a lot
movie.
of hardworking set decorators and artists and things.
Yeah. And throughout this, of course, we very quietly got this great performance by the restrained Amanette, who's having mercury pumped into her bloodstream, which is,
upsetting. Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of conceptually upsetting. Right? We get the aforementioned fight scene with Eddie Hyde. Good for Crow. Excellent for Crow. Like, I would like to see more of that from him in general, I think. Just really swinging for the rafters there. And then, we kind of reset again. Having built up some momentum here with the escape of Amanette, I just cannot track the chase scene across London. The scale of the damage also feels uncomfortable to me. It feels unsettling to me. I mean, a great time to be, in the window business in London, because you are going to, we've had storms blow through Norman here in Oklahoma, and you can't get a glazier to come and fix your windows for months at a time. I can't imagine what it's going to be like in London for years after this event. Entire generational wealth will be created by this event in London for sure, if you happen to own a glazing company. No, I find it, just impossible to follow and impossible to stay connected to. This is maybe where the CGI is overwhelming the rest of the film. And we do 6 different set pieces where 2 would have been sufficient.
It all starts to bleed together to me now. Yeah, definitely.
Which is such a, common criticism of modern films.
It's how I always feel about the end. Yeah.
Let's skip ahead then and talk about the emotional heart of this film, this relationship between Nick and Jenny, his decision to sacrifice himself so that he can become the god of death.
Right.
And save her by yelling at her in a pool of water.
Sure.
Can you imagine how unpleasant it must have been to shoot that, where she is just lying still in the back of shots for, fully 5 minutes of the film, which means she's there for a week, easy.
Very likely most of that was a body double, but yes,
well,
I hear
still
what you're
unpleasant
saying.
for the body double.
You know what? You're right. Still a human person. I want to say, first of all, that I do find all of the underwater stuff to be stressful. I always find underwater stuff to be stressful.
It's beautifully shot.
It's
I know I was
gorgeous.
being snide earlier about Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Snide. I was being snide about the 6 underwater zombies chasing Tom Cruise. But that shot where they rise up is just
it's gorgeous.
fantastic.
It's beautiful. No, it all looks great. And coming up for air where there's just a couple of inches between you and like the old brick. I hate it. But it's great. It looked great.
And more, extended Tom Cruise underwater. Like, we do understand, and it's because, of course, we're basically at this point staffing the entire film with people who have worked with Cruise before. But they understand his strength as a physical actor.
Yes.
And unlike Jack Reacher, we are really holding on these stunt performances, right? These extended performances underwater. And they're incredibly stressful just watching them. I find the underwater stuff here maybe even more stressful than the underwater stuff in Mission Impossible.
Maybe. Possibly so. Yeah.
Just because we're holding those shots for so long.
And it's the gasping for air is really upsetting.
Yeah,
it
is.
This is my favorite. This is the part I was talking about. Like, he seems so distressed, and his acting is so good that I want the whole movie to be better. Because
I can see that. I can see that, Reed.
It's really compelling, and
you have to backfill a relationship with Jenny,
which we don't have. Like,
who he canonically met a week ago.
Right.
Had sex with, stole her map, then left her alone
and
for
they've
3
just
or
been
4 days.
Tolerating each other ever since.
There's no chemistry. There's no spark. Again, 22 years age difference.
Right. Nothing in common even.
Shouldn't necessarily matter, but really does specifically in this film.
Maybe should necessarily matter, but I hear what you're saying. Yeah.
I think you can do an age gap story. I think that we like some age gap romance stories. I think it's perfectly possible to do that, but not casually, right?
Yeah.
It needs to be part of the
Yeah.
superstructure. It needs to
Yes.
be, particularly not when, we've also got Russell Crowe chewing the scenery in this film. But yeah, so if you can decide that there is a romantic connection between these two people that we haven't seen, or if you just imagine Brendan Fraser and Rachel Weisz doing it,
Right.
I think
Sure.
you're right. I think it's got something there. And
Well-
how often do we present our heroes with this kind of choice, right? How often do we present particularly male heroes with the choice to self-sacrifice to save the woman they love? That's something.
Yeah, I suppose so. I keep thinking now they've got him over in the corner and he's like looking at the wall and he's like, I don't even know what I am anymore. And I want like a monster reveal. I want to see.
And you'll get it in The Mummy 2. A part of the Dark
won't.
Universe coming out in 2019. That's another example of the movie just not committing to this film. It's making the mistake of building out the franchise at the expense of this film.
And then just resetting completely because then we're just back out on the high desert with Nick and Chris being buddies again. Oh, by the way, thanks for bringing me back to life, bud.
Yeah.
Just...
You're right.
Nothing.
But then our closing moments are the two of them on horseback riding toward the pyramids at Giza with the dust storm behind them, which looks
cool.
tremendous.
It looks cool. I don't know.
That's ultimately, I think, what we come down to with our discussion of this film. Obviously, it's not great. It does have undeniable high points.
Yeah.
Is what is here inoffensive? Is it just lost? Does it just lack sufficient focus and discipline?
Yeah.
Whether you believe that Cruise improved this production or took over this production, like whatever side of that aisle you're on, which, by the way, I'm pretty certain that what Cruise did was improve this production. I think that he wanted to absolutely assure his movie star status. Like, it's a selfish move in that sense. But, this is a professional workplace.
Yeah.
Everybody wants this movie to be a success. No one benefits from this movie being a failure. And he is a safe pair of hands. We think of him as a movie star, but he has been a producer for almost as long. He is always behind the scenes on these things. He's working with his people. He's trying to make this successful.
Yeah.
And when it is successful, it is, right? Like it has these moments, and the moments that work are all kind of Tom Cruise moments. Would you say?
Yes, ultimately, like I wish that they had had a better script because I do think something cool could have been made from this. And I think it shouldn't have been The Mummy. That's the main thing. Like, start somewhere else. Just start somewhere else.
So do you end up feeling that this was just a wasted opportunity, a missed opportunity perhaps, or are you angry about the politics of this? Are you angry about the weaponization of Tom Cruise's iconic status as a movie star, right? We talked about this going back to a Risky Business cocktail kind of era of Cruise. That's a deliberate choice. That's the thing that we were doing on purpose in order to kind of craft this scoundrelly character who we can kind of hate to love and love to hate, and then witness his arc into heroism that's going to build this franchise out. It's not unlike an Iron Man arc from the first film.
True.
That is exploiting Tom Cruise's movie star persona in a way that persona, has not been exploited for, since Eyes Wide Shut, I would say. That's the last time that we really leaned on everything you know about this guy in real life and tried to play with that on screen. That's my read. Do you think that the film is doing that, or am I just being a little sensitive and a little angry about Tom Cruise at this point?
No, maybe a little bit of the latter, but it's also, it seems to be writing for a Tom Cruise, of 30 years ago. Like, it just doesn't make, or 20 years ago, I guess, but it just doesn't make sense or sit right now.
Yeah. I think I maybe wouldn't be bothered about it if I had just watched The Mummy on a rainy Saturday afternoon and not thought anymore about it. But because we are engaged in this project, because one of the things that I'm thinking about a lot, particularly here as we come down to the end of his current excellent filmography, is Tom Cruise's iconicity, is his reputation, is his movie star status. A movie star status that is, I think, completely unique at this point in history, even when The Mummy comes out, completely unique. I'm thinking about the ways in which that is put to use, which is, I think, generally in the service of pretty reliable, safe, yes, but like pretty reliable filmmaking.
Yeah.
And here it is, exploited by a production that does not deserve it. And that sounds like morally loaded. Like, how dare this movie waste Tom Cruise, which is absolutely not what I mean. I mean that this is cynical. And I mean that it is cheap. And I mean that it is bad-hearted.
Yeah.
And all of this, I suppose, must now cohere into a grim decision that we must make. Where does this film go on the list of every Tom Cruise movie ever?
Yeah.
Do you want to open the negotiation here?
I I think that I disliked it less than you did. So I would be inclined to stick it somewhere around like, Night and Day, which also just didn't quite land and didn't know what it was doing. This movie disappointed and offended me in about the same way that Night and Day did, I suppose. Which puts it around, Far and Away.
Yeah.
The first Jack Reacher.
The first Jack Reacher.
Yeah.
I think that there is an argument from an aesthetic perspective, perhaps, that absolutely justifies that decision.
Yeah.
That I think
It
really,
looks beautiful.
this is just a middling Tom Cruise movie. Like the action is fine. It does look really good. The score is really quite
Some
good.
of the action's great, though. Again, I think that zero-G sequence, and I do think that lowering down into the cave the first time, I think there were some things that were just really cool that looked great.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely defensible. My objection to that, and kind of my alternate interpretation of this film, I suppose, is much more severe, because it is about the exploitation of Tom Cruise's movie star status, and it is about the bad, rampant American militarism, a thing that Tom Cruise is repeatedly accused of through his career, and which is almost never true, right? When you actually look at the films, when you actually study the text, going all the way back to Top Gun, there's actually very little rampant Americanism in the Tom Cruise filmography, but it is here, and it is ugly, and it is toxic. All of the stuff in Iraq at the beginning of the movie, which is narratively completely necessary. That's the worst thing, is that you can't just strip that stuff out. It needs to be there. He is an enlisted American soldier taking part in a war on foreign soil, stealing antiquities and relics for sale on the black market, and it doesn't matter. We don't even blink at the murder, the killing of all of these people through a drone strike, through a dispassionate drone strike, the application of overwhelming American military power in the foreign field. I think that is gross. So all of the Tom Cruise movie star status stuff, all of that American adventuresome militarism, all of that is toxic too. And then there's all the stuff about the dark universe. Building a franchise when you can't build a single movie. This is everything that is wrong with modern Hollywood. Banking on these franchises and building them out 6 or 8 or 10 or 30 movies deep, instead of telling a story. This is what killed the entire DC universe as a cinematic project. This is what is in the process right now, as of this recording. Dateline, August 16th. As of this recording, this is what is killing the Marvel universe right now. It's exactly this kind of thinking. You know what didn't do this? Iron Man. The first phase of the Marvel movies emerged into this kind of franchise building. They didn't conceive of it from the jump.
Right.
And that's why they work. I think it is a product, yes, of a toxic misunderstanding of the Hollywood system, but it is itself bad-hearted and cynical and caustic and abrasive. It misuses, I think, two very interesting, if not exceptional, very interesting female actors in the lead of this movie. It wastes the hell out of Jake Johnson, which is too bad. And I mean, maybe he's not mad about that, but I could be a little bit mad about that. I wouldn't mind him as a Nathan Drake action hero going forward, and we're not going to get that now because of his experiences on this film. I think that this is a product of the worst instincts and indulgences of the Hollywood system at this point in history. I think it is the worst application of Tom Cruise as a leading man. And I think that it is the worst example of gross, violent American militarism. Had I my druthers, and if this were a more politically charged podcast than it is perhaps, I think I would put this dead last.
Wow.
Certainly, no film that we've watched in this run has made me as angry as The Mummy.
Yeah.
And it's not even what's happening on screen, because you're right. What's happening on screen is mostly fine. Sometimes pretty good.
Yeah.
But what it means, the hollowness of this entire production from the goddamn jump, is so dispiriting.
Yeah.
I watch a film like this. I watch a film like this. I watch this exact film, and I think, just maybe forget it. Just maybe let's not make movies anymore. Maybe we don't need them.
Well, then maybe it lives down there with Tropic Thunder.
But see, I think that's partly the problem, right? I think that if you lean into the political reading of this film, it goes dead last and nowhere else. And if you don't lean into it, it's objectively a much better film than Tropic Thunder. Right? Like, I really do think that we're back up to, I might not go quite, I would have trouble, I think, putting this above The Outsiders, but I mean, we're in the same ballpark here, right? Like around Mission Impossible 2, Days of Thunder, right?
Yeah,
Days of Thunder also,
around there somewhere.
Days of Thunder, like a much smaller film, but also kind of hollow when you get right down to it. Certainly it's better than Jack Reacher Never Go Back, but I would say maybe better than Mission Impossible 2 Under the Outsiders is my non-politically charged opinion?
Sure. That, yeah. That
you feel
sounds
comfortable
good
with
to
that
me.
as a compromise?
Yeah, that's really close to where I was. I feel very comfortable with that.
Do you think anyone is still listening to the podcast after that last rant? I think everyone just hit that skip forward 30 seconds button. Just in time to get to the part of the show where we thank our generous patrons.
Yay.
Patrons, thank you so much for your support. Elizabeth, would you like to thank those brave, adventuresome souls who, as prophecy foretold, have supported us here at Next Word?
Thank you to Leslie Skipa, Louise in Dallas, Megan Louder, Phoebe, Art Kilmer, Kimberly Bear, Self on a Shelf, Jolene Stark, Chris Dawns, and the Lady Gordon.
And that is going to do it for our discussion of The Mummy. Let's all agree to never think of it again. Next week, the second of Cruise's 2017 films, and this one even manages to turn a modest profit. Doug Liman is back after Edge of Tomorrow, and Cruise pairs up with Domhnall Gleeson and Jesse Plemons in the action comedy American Made, which has, I was very surprised to learn, a pretty solid IMDb rating.
People have been telling me that this one's good.
7.1. That's the same as Valkyrie and Tropic Thunder, which admittedly are two films that we like less than most people do, but that's a solid IMDb score, so we'll talk about that next week as we close out the Shaky trilogy and set the stage for, hopefully, a triumphant run here to the end of the
Let's
last star
hope so.
in
Let's
Hollywood.
go. Yeah.
Guys, thank you all so much for listening. We'll be back next week with more. Until then, take care.
We'll see you next time.